and I will be helping to facilitate this afternoon's meeting with Lori Alshouse and Andy Bowman. A few housekeeping items I just want to quickly mention before we get into the presentation itself. As Lori mentioned earlier, this is a webinar style Zoom, so there is a room for audience members to listen in, and then there's a room for the panelists, which the panelists right now can see who they are. Thank you to the audience who are attending today. We appreciate your presence. For the audience, there is a Q&A function. We will not be monitoring and answering that tool should you choose to ask a question, but if you do, staff will at the end of the meeting gather those questions and review what was submitted. This meeting is recorded and we will be taking action minutes only. If you're on the committee, we ask on the CIP Advisory Committee, we ask that your video is on throughout the meeting. If you are a staff member and not presenting, if you could turn your video off when you're not presenting, that'll keep videos in the right place on people's screens and make it a little bit simpler. So with that, I will move into today's agenda.
Before we begin, Maya, has Bea joined us?
I just texted her. She's trying to get on. She's having some trouble. She said Travis is helping her.
Okay, great. I'm glad she's having help. Great.
To begin, we will do a little bit of an introduction so we can see who's on and see each other's faces. And after that, we will go over the advisory committee charge. This was provided to you earlier. We'll also talk to you about this year's process and how it's atypical as a lot of things we're dealing with this year. We will review a list of projects for consideration. This was sent to you ahead of time also. This is the list of 23 projects, projects that have been paused or delayed, and projects that were originally planned before the pandemic. Those are the projects we will be discussing today. And we do want to acknowledge that there are priorities and other important projects that may need to be considered, but we really wanted to frame what the discussion would be around for the purposes of this committee. Staff will share an initial scenario. We will call this scenario number 1 throughout the presentation. We will share with you the approach that was taken to get to scenario number 1, the assumptions that were made, and they do include both FY21, so projects for consideration for this fiscal year, as well as FY22 projects for the next fiscal year. We'll also discuss, per the committee's charge, how they adhere with the county's policies and goals. This scenario 1 is here for you to review, for you to ask questions. And there'll be a lot of time, as you can see, 1 hour and 15 minutes for you all to discuss in a round robin style your reaction to that scenario. So I don't see that Bea is on yet. I was hoping to go around the room and have everyone on the committee jump in and introduce yourself in this order. This is also the order where we will begin the committee discussion after our presentation. So if Ms. Lepisto-Kirtley is not on, can we start with Ms. Price?
Thank you. I'm Donna Price, the supervisor for the Scottsdale Magisterial District. As everyone knows, this is my first year on the board, so my first year in participating in this. Not sure exactly what you want in our introductions, but I do know that one of the things, or several of the things that I'm most interested in is equity as we look at identifying projects, not just equity in applying projects that have previously been identified, as well as, I would say right now, expanding broadband throughout our community. And I will just kind of leave that as my introduction, and appreciate the responsibility that goes with being a part of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alcaro?
Hi, my name is Jono Alcaro. I'm on the Albemarle County School Board. I'm the at-large representative, and I believe this is my third year on this committee.
Dr. Acuff?
I'm Kate Acuff. I'm on the school board representing the Jack Jewett district. I don't know how long I've been on this committee. It's longer than Jono, I think perhaps 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 years. I'd like to echo Donna Price's comments about looking at our projects through an equity lens and perhaps discussing what that even means.
Good.
Mr. Morris?
Hi, I'm Cal Morris, and this is my third year on the board, and it's a real privilege to represent the general public. Thank you.
And Ms. Firehawk?
I'm Karen Firehawk, and I am Vice Chair of the Planning Commission and representing the Planning Commission. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I don't see, is Shbi on? I can't tell.
She's not on yet. Apparently she's having some technical difficulties,
Okay,
but she should be on soon.
okay, thank you. We will continue on. Just a quick review of the charge for the meeting for today and next week. As I mentioned, we will review the recommended projects in scenario number 1 today. We will ensure that these projects do align with our established policies, priorities, and guiding principles. And we will provide a CIP AC recommendation that will be a little bit different from previous years because we are going to consider the option for a mid-year appropriation for the current year, as well as providing a recommendation for FY22. After we finalize the scenario, we will report this scenario to the school board, the Board of Supervisors, Superintendent, Planning Commission, and the County Executive for consideration. This is the timeline of how the CIP AC fits into the broader capital budgeting process. We kicked it off in September with the school board, where the school board discussed what the process would look like and projects that were under consideration. And at a very high level, there was a discussion about what the priorities are, what's important, and why. After that, there was a joint board work session on affordability with the 2 boards. And then just last week, the Board of Supervisors had their work session where they discussed capital projects. So those work sessions feed into our 2 CIP AC meetings, where we will discuss a scenario and provide a recommendation. And if necessary, after the December 3rd meeting, we would, the school board would request a mid-year capital appropriation for FY21. And then the FY22 projects would be provided for the county executive for his recommended budget. And because of the timing of what we know about available revenues, there will be a different revenue picture potentially in January when we have a revenue update. So there will be a piece of information that will come in between now and the recommended capital budget in February. And I will turn things over to Lori to discuss a little bit about this year's approach.
Thank you so much, Maya. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I really appreciate it. This is a different way, of course, this year with the Zoom meeting. I do want to thank our folks at the schools. The school staff and local government staff work hand in hand in this meeting, and it's just always a real pleasure. This year's approach is a little different in many ways. One is, for those of you that worked with us last year and were part of this process, we had planned a 5-year CIP. In the 5-year CIP, we had ranked things together. The school board and the Board of Supervisors spent a lot of time together to rank projects and to build a 5-year CIP. And as you know, the pandemic hit. And what we've done is we really decided to really concentrate this meeting and this process right now on fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. So we've shortened the timeline, and when we talk in this way, we're really talking more about the capital budget. And what we have decided is that we are not going to assume any tax rate increase for the operating nor the capital budgets in fiscal year 22. And a while back, we had assumed that there might be a tax rate equivalent associated with capital in the CIP over the 5 years. And this is a change, and this is a affordability restriction that we have in place for our work today. We want to move forward if the committee approves some projects and the board and the school board do as well, move forward with some additional fiscal year 21 capital year mid-year appropriations. And for those of you, we're going to talk a lot in fiscal years that aren't familiar with our fiscal year approach to budgeting. We're halfway through almost. January would be halfway through fiscal year 21. So what we're basically saying here is there's some projects that were delayed or paused that because we've been monitoring our revenues, we're a little further along than we were back when we put our budget together for fiscal year 2021, that we may be able to get some projects moving forward even mid-year that have been delayed. So that's going to be part of this discussion today. And you're going to see some slides where we're talking about what are some projects we build in scenario 1 for this year that could get started very soon, and then which are the projects or programs that we're talking about for fiscal year 22, which is the next fiscal year that we're putting our budget together for later on this winter. Also, that we've really simplified the process this year. Last year we had several more meetings. We were thinking again long-term, 5 years. We've really simplified the process, and for that reason, this process is simplified. So these meetings, often we would have more than 2, and we would even add a meeting if the committee said, hey, we need to have some more conversation, can we add a meeting? This won't happen this year. This year we're going to have two 2-hour meetings for a total of 4 hours. So we're going to be really precise. We're going to limit our conversation, as Maya mentioned, on 23 projects, and we're going to stay very precise so that we can meet this timeline. And then the plan is that we'll return to our 5-year, our longer term capital improvement plan that we call the CIP next year, and connect it to our updated strategic plans. Both the school board and the board of supervisors are updating their strategic plans. And also we'll bring back the 5-year financial planning piece that we usually do in the fall. So basically this is just a 1-year change, and that our plan is to move back to our regular process next year. So this is a slide that we shared with, when I say we, I'm speaking of local government staff, shared with our board of supervisors at our meeting this just last week. And we thought it was a good slide to share with this group as well, because it's very important to really think about the affordability framework. And again, that's similar to what we did last year. We always thought about affordability first. So you all know that there's a financial connection between our capital budget decisions and our operating budget. Those of us in the world of budget always talk about those 2 terms. The capital budget is what we're focusing on today, but there's often operating or ongoing costs that are associated with a project or a capital project. We have to really keep that in mind this year. Our challenge is the world is different. We are in a pandemic. We are not sure how the economy will change. We know it's going to change after the pandemic. We're not really sure how all the revenues are going to go. So right now, one of the main things we need to think about, not that we haven't thought about them before, but really important this year, is those future operating costs, because that's the piece that we're not sure about. So we have to really put that first and foremost, is how are we going to take on operating costs that are associated with projects. So you'll see a lot of emphasis on that today. It's also, the other thing that's going on is that, as you know, we have a lot of frozen positions in the county, and a lot of our positions have been kind of redeployed to support the pandemic response. So the other challenge, and there's 2, the second challenge is really whether we can deploy a project or not. So as we're putting a project in place, can we get that project off the ground? Can we get it moved with the reductions in staff right now? So those are the two lenses I want you to keep in mind, along with the other lens you spoke about earlier today. And the other thing, again, no tax rate increase in fiscal year 22. We just finished our first quarter financial report, and this was something we shared with the board on November 18th. And it's consistent with our budgetary expectations of where we think we are right now. But we're still, we're still careful because the real estate assessment process is underway, and we'll know more about that in January. So your guys are a little bit ahead of the process on the revenues. So we're going to stay with the revenue assumptions we have today, but the revenue picture can change and likely will change as we move through the process that may show you on the timeline. The other thing that's just important for you to know, when we went into the pandemic situation, we maintain our strategic contingencies and reserves. We are a county that does that anyway. We're very mindful of making sure we have proper reserves, but we wanted to make sure that you are aware that we are still maintaining those strategic contingencies and reserves that we put in place at the beginning of the pandemic. So I mentioned it before, and we probably will over-mention it, but it's really important that we have a very specific focus on the committee this year. And basically, we're really focused on 23 projects. And these 23 projects are going to be shown to you a couple ways today. There's fiscal year 21 projects that may have been delayed from the past or reduced. So when the pandemic hit, and we were aware that things are different, we paused and delayed projects that were non-essential or that we didn't have a contract that we had to deliver on. And we were very thoughtful about it. Some we didn't pause, but we did pause or reduce some projects. We don't want to leave them off the table. That's going to be a discussion you're going to have, is to look at those paused projects. And additionally, when we put the CIP together before, we had projects identified for fiscal year 22. So what you're going to see is a combination of those paused or delayed projects and the fiscal year 22 projects that were put in the CIP last year. Maya mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit about our criteria used, because you're going to see an initial scenario today. And the scenario was put together by the local government staff, and we took into account our strategic plan, and we also thought about the new reality we're in. Now, these 23 projects doesn't have everything in there that we think we need to focus on based on the new world that we're living in today, but that was definitely a lens that we thought of when we put together your first scenario. Also, affordability and taxpayers' considerations were in our mind on that, and again, that's why there's not a tax rate increase built into this. The ability to execute, I mentioned before, can we execute these projects? Can we move them forward given our current situation? And again, the operating costs that I mentioned before. Now, you're going to see this slide a couple different ways, but what I wanted to do was share this with you, and our Board of Supervisors saw this on November 18th. We have a list of 23 projects, and these are on 2 slides. This first slide shows the projects, and they're ranked. So again, local government staff took a first stab at ranking things just for a scenario and a starting point for consideration. And you can see the ranking on the left. You can see the description of the project or program in that middle area. Those that are in blue are projects or programs associated with the schools. Schools and local government, we do our CIP together in Albemarle County. And then that next column was where we connected projects specifically that were very specific to our strategic initiatives. Our initiatives are very specific in our strategic plan this year, so we connected those to those projects. And then that last column, again, that emphasis on operational impacts, we really are keeping that in mind this year. You can see the operational impacts that were identified when the project was put in front of us. A lot of information still needs scrubbed. There could be some adjustments or changes in these operational impacts. You will hear on project number 3, the Crozet addition and improvement does have already an operational impact adjustment. So these are the numbers where we got them in and where we started with, but you will see a change at least on that item, and through the whole process until we get to the fiscal year 22 budget, we will continue to scrub our numbers. And then the next page is the rest of the projects ranked from 12 to 23. And the reason we have them on 2 slides like this, and I'll give you a little hint to the rest of the story today, is that the projects 1 to 11, that slide I just showed you, are the projects we were able to build into scenario 1 for your consideration. The projects on this page that have been delayed, or pause are not in that scenario at the time. So that's a way we thought would help break it apart for you to be able to toggle back and forth, especially as we're virtual, from the first slide to the second slide. And again, this is the same situation where you see the link to the strategic plan, the operational impacts, and the ranking. Now I'm going to turn this over to Andy Bowman, who's going to walk you through this scenario 1, which will be a starting point for your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for the introduction. As she mentioned, I'll be talking through scenario 1, and with me, I'd like to recognize our senior budget analyst, Tia Mitchell, working in the budget division, who is primarily works in the area of our capital improvements program, debt service, and certainly will be available as we get into more Q&A about this portion of the presentation and the committee's discussion. So just to talk at a high level scenario 1, before we get into any numbers or projects, just to orient kind of where the discussion is today. Scenario 1 really has 3 components as illustrated in this pyramid. The bottom portion in gray is really about our foundation of currently funded capital programs and projects. As this committee is aware, the capital budget is a multi-year program, and when we think about this in many areas of the county, as we think of long-range planning, but it's more than just a one-year exercise. And so already in the current year, there are a number of projects already approved and appropriated by the Board of Supervisors that are moving forward, and also continuing projects that have been moving forward from the past year. So we want to acknowledge this because it will show up in the numbers and be part of our story today, but it's not really where we envision most of the committee's discussion taking place today. The middle part of the triangle would be the fiscal year 21 mid-year adjustment that Ms. Alshouse referenced, where there were projects that were paused back in the spring, and now there may be an opportunity as circumstances have changed to begin to unpause some of those. And so we'll talk about what's included in that category. And then also moving into the top of the triangle, just a little more down the road to the fiscal year 22 budget that we are beginning to develop now. There will be a look at what's included in that for the capital budget for fiscal year 22. So with that kind of high-level orientation, I'm going to first hit on some other high-level assumptions about scenario 1. I'll start in the upper left and kind of go around clockwise. The first assumption we have is that we have a stabilized bond market. When many of these projects were paused back in the start of the pandemic in March and April, the county, working with its financial advisors, had legitimate reason to have concern that the county would not be able to access the financial markets to borrow for projects at that time. And so while some projects were put on hold because there was less revenue than previously projected to come into the capital budget, there was also this concern as well. The good news is, continuing the dialogue with our financial advisors, we can check this off the list, and that's no longer a concern today. Moving to the box in the upper right, this is another good news, again, in coordination with our county's financial advisors in terms of projecting what our interest rates will be for future borrowings. We have reduced our assumption on borrowing rates by about 75 basis points for those interest rates. And for some more context of what that actually means, in the scenario 1, there's about a $400,000 savings in fiscal year 22 based on these new rates than we would have if we were at our old rates. And just as we, like always in the budget, as we plan to get new information, or we can reflect that in future models. But right now, that is where we stand with the, again, in coordination with the expertise of our financial advisors. The third box in the kind of bottom right is what Ms. Alshouse already spoke to. We have eliminated the tax increase for capital, as was discussed with the board and school board at the October 21st meeting. And this is a change from where the CIP advisory committee was a year ago, contemplating additional investments dedicated to capital. And finally, we have also modeled 0% revenue growth in fiscal year 22. What this revenue growth refers to is the amount of funding that is transferred of local tax revenue from the general fund to the capital and debt program. This is a preliminary assumption as we're continuing to study revenues. The most notable change being when we have the reassessment for calendar year 21 that will be completed in January. But with every month of revenue data in the pandemic, we are watching that closely to see whether we'll need to adjust that. So with those high-level assumptions aside, we can now move into some of the more kind of dollars and projects that make up scenario 1. And I'm going to start, if you kind of remember the picture of the pyramid, this is in gray, kind of to match the diagram we showed before. So we start with a total of $89.1 million in currently funded programs and projects. These have all been appropriated by the Board of Supervisors in the current fiscal year. There's really kind of 2 categories. The first on the left is that we call the previous year carry forward for projects that were underway in prior years that are either just take multiple years by nature or cross fiscal years, because of how a capital program typically works with projects. That total is just under $71 million, and there are projects listed here. This is not a comprehensive list. These are just examples of what's included in there. And then to the right-hand column, we have the fiscal year 21 adopted budget effective on July 1st. There was $18.2 million added to the budget for maintenance and replacement programs, other county obligations, and we did include funding for economic development, public-private partnerships, or P3s. So that is the base of that pyramid that will be reflected in our numbers. So already right now we have a currently approved capital budget of $89 million. So now we'll move to the middle of the pyramid, which was what may be considered to be unpaused mid-year in fiscal year 21. And this, for the committee's consideration, is a total of about 35, or rounding up to $36 million of projects. And what this includes is the top line of maintenance and replacement projects. And just again, those other kind of county ongoing programs or obligations. There's a total of $8.1 million that we would unpause. Back in the pandemic, while we paused certainly a number of kind of projects that have been on those lists of 23, there are also some maintenance programs that we looked at and paused at that time as well. And so it's just part of the county's philosophy of prioritizing maintenance and replacement. That funding would be recommended to be unpaused. Now below that line, where we would hope to have most of the committee's discussion today, is what Ms. Allshouse referenced to is across fiscal year 21 and 22. The top 11 projects we have begun to fit into either fiscal year 21 or fiscal year 22. So we have here listed with the dollar amounts in fiscal year 21, 8 of those 11 projects. And I will not talk through them in detail. If there's those 3 projects that you did not see are going to be on the next slide for fiscal year 22. And if we could go ahead and transition to fiscal year 22. I'll start at the top like we did on the previous slide. For the fiscal year 22 capital budget, we have a total of $56 million. And this includes our maintenance and replacement and other ongoing programs and obligations that we may have. Just as we have looked at our ability to execute on these additional projects of the 23 that were paused, we are doing the same for our maintenance program as well. So while it is prioritized, it certainly gets a regular review of staff and consideration rather than automatic, what dollars may have been previously planned. One of the larger items that are included in that $56 billion falls under obligations. We have additional funding for the course project, which is the General District Court renovation and addition construction. That will be a total of $25 million that will start in fiscal year 22. And then kind of below the line, the lighter gray box, we have the other 3 projects that were in the top 11, but not on the previous slide. And those are the transportation leveraging program funding, additional funding for economic development P3s, which is the public-private partnerships, and then the Mountain View School expansion and site improvements. So at this point, I will turn the presentation back over to Maya to discuss an update related to the Crozet project.
We just have some updated information on the Crozet Elementary School project. We have gone back and scrubbed a little bit more what the operational impacts would be should the school open in FY23. We are anticipating adding an additional 5.8 FTEs, which is equivalent to about $400,000. The previous number that was shared in past presentations was $107,000. And the reason for the operational impacts is that we're not simply growing the existing student population at Crozet. This would involve a redistricting of students from Brownsville Elementary to Crozet Elementary in order to get those 2 schools more to approximately the same size. And with that shift in students would come a shift in resources needed in staff. And that's what those 5.8 FTEs represent.
Thank you. Now we'll come back to me for 2 more slides. This kind of steps back. We began talking about high level what the capital budget looks like and total needs assumptions. But I want to talk about both the general fund side of its contribution to capital and then also the capital program as a whole. So I'm going to slow down a little bit because there are more numbers on this slide than there have been on the previous ones, or if they were very specific to projects and a little easier to get your head around. So what this table represents is the amount of funding that the general fund sends to our debt and capital cost in fiscal year 21 and 22. The general fund is the primary fund of the county, and it's where all local tax revenue is received. That local tax revenue is then divided up to support operating costs for schools and local government, as well as the debt and capital costs for schools and local government. So there's a formula allocation to get it to a total of $30.1 million in fiscal year 21, which is the total we see at the bottom of fiscal year 21. And how we apply that 30.1 to debt and capital is the very first thing that we do is we fund our debt service obligation. This is just the amount we pay every year to pay for the cost the county has borrowed in the past. So in fiscal year 21, we have about $22 million between our existing and projected debt. Then that remainder of $8.1 million is sent to the capital program as cash to fund for pay-as-you-go projects. And that is how we get to a total of 30.1 in the split between debt and capital. As we move to fiscal year 22, I'm actually going to start at the bottom like I did before, because we're not assuming any revenue growth as of today. But we still have a total of $30.1 million to allocate among debt and capital cost. But what we have is a change that I'll talk through. The first line of debt service existing is 21.5. That is a decrease from fiscal year 21 of about $500,000, and that reflects that the debt the county is retiring or is paying off from prior borrowings. The more notable change is in the next line where we have a debt service projected of $6.1 million in fiscal year 22. Now, the reason for that number is that this spring in fiscal year 21, the county will be borrowing for capital projects for the first time since 2017, which was the last time that was done. So this will be a significant borrowing not only for projects that may be included in the fiscal year 21 budget, but also for some projects that have been borrowed in the past to reimburse the county for that. So when that initial kind of borrowing happens in the spring, the first payment of that will be in fiscal year 22. That is why we have that increase. So as kind of talked about before, as debt service costs increase and we go up to or an increase in debt service costs, that would leave less in fiscal year 22 or pay as you go for capital. So that decreases proportionally down to 2.5 million to reflect the change in debt service. And that's again back to the 30.1. So that is the general fund side to capital. And now I'm going to look at the capital program as a whole and kind of look at where are the revenues and expenditures on that side. And I'm going to start at the bottom again to think about this in total. In fiscal year 21, we have a total with what has been approved to date, and with the additional 35 or 36 million rounding up that is in scenario one, we would have a total appropriated capital budget of $124.4 million in total expenditures. And those expenditures are being funded by a combination of sources. The first line is the CIP pay-as-you-go line. Those top two numbers are coming from the slide before. We looked at like what was coming from cash from the general fund of 8.1 million, and then that decrease as the county's debt service cost increase in 22. So we have just 2.5 million for pay-as-you-go in 22. The next line is other CIP revenues. These are revenues that are associated with projects. For example, if there was state funding associated with a project, if there was a joint maintenance project or joint facility with the city of Charlottesville and they had a share to contribute, that would be included in that. Any profit funding associated with projects, that would all be included in those, and they are other CIP revenues, but they tend to be tied primarily to the projects that are included. The third line is our planned borrowed proceeds of 94 million in 21, and then an additional 33 in fiscal year 22. And then the remainder is being provided for from the capital fund balance, which we monitor as part of our financial management strategies over multiple years. We have just under 11 million in 21 and just under 13 million in 22. And so that makes up the 124, the revenues make up 124 million of funding for fiscal year 21. And then the 56.3, which is the slide we referenced in dark green a few slides ago for those projects that would be unpaused in fiscal year 22, as well as those maintenance projects and obligations such as the courts project. So that was talking through a lot of numbers, and I can pause for questions, and at this point we can go to Lori, who I believe will finish up our presentation before we get to the broader committee.
I just have a couple of minor questions, if I might, and to make sure that I understood what you were saying in terms of taking the 22 million to 21.5 million. Is that, and it was, did you say that we were reducing the debt by $500,000? Because I'm very interested in how much of our debt is coming due this year.
So the top line of the 22 to 21.5, that really reflects the borrowings that took place over the last 20 years finally being paid off. And so there's I guess an impact of $500,000 of debt is essentially being retired that will no longer be an obligation for the county after this current fiscal year.
And if I could ask Maya just a quick question with the new number of the 400,000 with the FTEs, that takes into calculation the number of students moving from Brownsville to Crozet, and that would have to include some teachers going at the same time, or some personnel, because there wouldn't be as much of a need for teachers with a lower number of students. And so are you saying in this that it would be the net amount after those calculations for that 5.x number, or for the $400,000 in FTE expenses?
Yes, the latter is correct. That is the net amount that would need to be added after the shift.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Were there any other questions for either Andy or Maya? And we can always go back later, but are there any now that any of you would like to ask?
Lori Morris here. One question that I had, I heard from both a county government and education rep that they were hoping that one of our key areas would be extending service so that everyone in the county would have access to the internet and so on. But I have not heard anything, nor have I seen any of the priorities covering that topic. Is this just something that came up at the last minute? What is it?
Okay, I will start answering that. We actually have other staff members here as well, a number of staff members that will probably be able to articulate it better than me. What you're referring to is often referred to as broadband as well, right? Making sure that everyone through the county has access, can afford it, or has access to the internet due to the pandemic, and there are some areas of the county that's hard, and there are some people that's hard for. So we definitely had a very important and long conversation about that. The Board of Supervisors did at their meeting on the 18th. And that is extremely important priority for the county. So that is not lost. And the Board of Supervisors is going to have another conversation on that either in December or January to talk about broadband. And so for purposes of this meeting, we thought we would focus on the 23 projects that were delayed or paused or planned for 22, but that is definitely a big priority, and it's not going to be lost, and it's going to be discussed in the upcoming 2 months.
Thank you very much. It just seems that the broadband is going to affect not only the school situation, but also all those who have to work from home. So both sides of the table are interested in this, I would think.
Yes, I believe so too. Do others want to add any information on this?
Hey, Lori. And all. This is Trevor Henry, Assistant County Executive. Good afternoon, everybody. Cal, great to see you. It's been a while.
Good seeing you.
Yes, sir. I also, as part of my role, sit on the Broadband Authority, and I wanted to just note, really echoing your question, Cal, and what Ms. Oshouse just communicated. This was a top priority with strong consensus across the board. Board of Supervisors at our meeting a week ago, and also going back a month, this topic came up during the joint meeting between the school board and the Board of Supervisors. So clear priority for the community, clear priority for the county. County Executive, Mr. Jeff Richardson, took an action from the meeting, bring back through our budget process funding and program recommendations for sustainable broadband funding to really help move the needle really in two areas. One is kind of the extension into the parts of the county that have no broadband. And then secondly, and I'll say as important, is especially in the urban areas where there are affordability issues. And so we will be working as staff. We have a Broadband Authority meeting tomorrow that we're going to be talking about this. And this will be coming in through the budget process. I will note that the funding that the authority has received to date did not come through the CIP. It was one-time money. It was about $1 million, and it was funded just over 3 years ago. That has been used for matching grants with the state. So I can talk in more detail, but there's a lot of work that has been done and will be done over the next 4 to 6 weeks with the authority and with staff as part of our budgeting process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Travis.
I can also join in. Hi, Cal. This is Bea. How are you?
Hey, Dee. Good. Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to say that I finally got on. My Outlook was not working, so thank you, Travis, for helping me, and everyone is trying to help me. Anyway, I wanted you to know that CenturyLink is putting in fiber in the Watts Passage area, and that they're going to have the groundbreaking next month, actually. And then they've also applied for if they get their application grant funded, then the whole Cobham area also will be, CenturyLink will go in there, and within 18 months, they have to put in fiber. Some areas will get it sooner, but they have to do that. So hopefully, and we'll find out mid-December, January, whether that application, their application was funded. They're hopeful because the governor has put in, I think, 49 million additional for broadband, and maybe it's more now, but they put that in, so they're hopeful. But at least the Watts Passage area, which is in the northern part of the Ravenna district, that will be going in. So some good news.
Good. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point? Okay, I'll move forward because we really want to get to the time where you have your discussion. We just have a couple more slides, I believe. This slide is important in that part of your charge as a committee is to check the box that what we're doing is adhering to our financial policies. And what we want to tell you is with scenario 1, the staff did the research on it, and we are meeting our target debt ratio policy. We have a couple that, when we say our financial policies, they're Board of Supervisors approved policies that the county adheres to. And we are definitely meeting our debt policies. And this is like how much debt you can have as a government based on some criteria. So the net debt is as a percentage of the estimated market value of our taxable property in the county should not exceed 2%, and it doesn't. The ratio of debt service expenditures to our general fund and school fund revenues should not exceed 10%, and it doesn't. And we could provide more details on this. We used to put a lot of charts and look at it over 5-year periods, but because we are really focusing this year on a year and a half, a very concentrated focus, we didn't put all those charts and things together over the longer period of time at this point. But we are keeping that in mind. We don't forget the debt that we're expecting to come down the pike on this. And the other thing that's in your financial policies is a statement about cash in your capital program. And you've heard Andy Bowman speak about pay-as-you-go or pay-go. That basically is the cash contribution to the capital program. And the policy statement reads, the county believes in funding a significant portion of our capital improvements on a cash basis. And indeed, there's some things that we only can spend with cash that we do not borrow for. There's also a goal statement. So it's not a requirement, but it's a goal statement that's included in the financial policies at this time. And it's that the budgeted net transfer over to the capital. When we say over to capital, that means over to the cash part of the capital and debt program after debt service would be 3% of our general fund revenues. And this does not quite meet the 3%. However, it does do a really good job at getting extremely close. I think it's 2.8% in the first year. And Tia, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But we are taking advantage of this current interest rate environment. The interest rates are extremely low right now. And you heard Mr. Bowman talking about going out for a borrowing. That's something that we are, as the Finance and Budget Office manages this funding. There's a very important time, we believe, to take advantage of this current interest rate environment, which would save money for the community for years to come. And also, we have some available cash balances from prior year pay-as-you-go on hand, and we're going to utilize that available cash balance in this program. So we feel very comfortable with how this piece is in your in the scenario model that we shared with you. So. If there's not any questions on that, we can move to the next slide. One question that was asked of us, I believe at the joint meeting with the school board and the Board of Supervisors, was at least share, we mentioned earlier, there's not a tax rate increase programmed into this scenario not for capital or for operating. And we were asked to at least share some information about what a tax rate increase would have been able to do. And when we talk about a penny on the tax rate, it pretty much equals almost $2 million. You see 1.98 million for calendar year 2020. And as you know, tax rates are on the calendar year, not the fiscal year. And an example of what an additional penny on the tax rate could support, it could support the debt service, again, the debt payments, for about a $25 million project over a 20-year period. Or it could approximately, of course, be able to use as cash towards a cash-funded project at $2 million per year. So this is just an informational slide, just to kind of give you a perspective on that. Now we're going to move now into your discussion, and Maya's going to really help with this, with kind of a round-robin approach. And so. What we're going to do is we're going to bring up this scenario one again, the 23 projects, sharing with you what's in the scenario and what was not added to the scenario. And this is a time for you as a board, and those of you that, as a committee, those of you that have been on the committee before know that we can make some adjustments and bring some adjustments back to the committee. So again, we started with our very best effort as staff to put a scenario together as your starting place. We think that it has a lot of good criteria used to put that together. We thought a lot about our ability to execute, but we want to make sure that you have ability to have a conversation about those projects that are continuing to pause, or maybe some of the projects or programs that are in that you're thinking, well, maybe we should pause those. So what we're going to do is we're going to share those two slides in a moment, those two charts, and then you can have your conversation about it. You can bring in information. We're hoping that the Board of Supervisors and the school boards can share some information about your meetings that you had on the capital program and what were important to your fellow board members. And you can ask questions to each other. Also, you can have a conversation the best we can virtually. And then what you can ask us is for us to bring you back some adjustments to these scenarios for you to look at your next meeting. Now, because of the short timeline and because of the short turnaround timeline for staff, here's our suggestion on these scenarios. If, for example, you have a scenario, you want to see something a little bit different than what we put in front of you. Remember, we got to stay within the affordability lens on this whole project. But you would say, okay, I'd like you to bring back a scenario with these changes in it. And there might be some back and forth with some of our staff that actually do the modeling to make sure we understand exactly what you're looking for. And it might be that if you want to add something in, what would you take out? And then we would ask that 3 committee members agree on it, so that it's kind of a group agreement to come back for the staff to bring something back to you. And we will provide these guiding it'll have to be kind of an iterative approach that we'll be providing some guidance and some conversation along the way so that we make sure we understand what you want, and then we also can bring something back that we feel that we can bring it back to you. So that's kind of the guidelines for it. I hope that this works as well as it can virtually, and we definitely can be flexible as we go through the rest of the discussion. So I'm going to move forward to these 2 slides. And then Maya will do kind of the round robin approach. So just as a reminder, again, you saw this earlier. You saw the numbers in lots of different ways. This particular chart are all the projects and programs in scenario 1. And again, this is building on the foundational projects that Andy Bowman went over. So you can see these are the ones that we have actually been able to build in. You remember that there was an adjustment on Crozet and addition improvements on the operating impacts that we didn't know originally when the local government staff put this together as the initial ranking. You'll see how they come in 21 and 22. And then we've also added some dollar amounts so you can get an idea of the general dollar amount that these projects are. And then what we can do is toggle back and forth on these slides. If you go to the next one, you can see these are the projects that are still paused that we were not able to bring into scenario 1. So you can see a number of projects there, again, with the dollar amounts. And these dollar amounts are the ones that were the actual amount that's paused. And so it may not be exactly equal to what the project cost in its entirety, but it gives you an indication of what numbers we have on hand right now. And again, all these numbers will continue to be scrubbed as we work towards the next part of the process. So I'm going to stop there. And Maya, if you want to come on board and light up your picture and help people through this process. And thank you all very much. And if you need those slides brought back up, she could surely do it for you. Thank you.
Well, as just an initial to get our discussion started, we thought we'd go around in the same order that you introduced yourselves. And I will tee you up because you don't have that list in front of you. Just share your initial thoughts with the group, please. So we'll start with Ms. Lapisto-Kirtley.
And you may want to start introducing yourself too. Since
Yes, okay. Well, I am Beatrice Lapisto-Kirtley. I'm the one that couldn't get on, or my Microsoft Outlook didn't work, and I had to get like 5,000 people to help me, but we finally did it. Anyway, my questions, can we go back to the scenario they went through the first list? And, okay, so I have a question. I mean, I think all these projects, when they first came on, that was before the pandemic, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think in light of the pandemic, in my opinion, I think we should really, really look at this closely to see what projects would benefit the community the most. And anything, of course, we had all these wonderful projects, but that's when we had more money. So look at what is going to have the best impact regarding for the community, frankly, with an emphasis on schools, but not for extra things for schools, but things that we really do need for schools that would make those better, and things that would make people's lives easier. One thing I'm not seeing on here, and I know it was discussed when I first got on the board, and that is a convenience center in the southern part of Albemarle County. I understand that wasn't a huge dollar figure, but that's something that would really add a quality of life to a lot of people down there, because right now I understand they have to drive like 30 miles in order to, you know, dump everything. So I'm throwing that in, but I'm also looking to see which ones do we really need. So parks, restroom renovation, modernization, if those are really, really being used, then a restroom renovation might very well be beneficial. The Windows replacement, I know that's a $15,000 savings, but can that be put off for a year? I mean, we don't know how long the pandemic is going to last. We don't know if it's maybe next year to be gone and then our economy will come roaring back. But I really would like to focus on what will give us the best bang for our buck, i.e. service to the communities and our schools. That's my initial input.
Thank you. Ms. Price?
Thank you. I'm sort of a both and person. I agree with some of what Supervisor Lepisto currently just said in terms of as we look at the projects, which are the ones that will provide the greatest benefit to the most people, while at the same time want to be very careful that we don't ignore the smaller projects or other demographics within the county that also need projects to help them. Because otherwise we end up facing something comparable to our road improvement situation where all the money statewide has gone to Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Tidewater, and our transportation needs here sometimes fall further back. I will have some broader general comments after we go through this because I understand that we're going to focus on these 23 projects. So I have a first question. Well, first another comment, then a question. So I'm going to give due deference to the school board members to first hear from them on those blue highlighted or blue lettered items that come from the school system because I want to hear from them on some of their priorities. But so my basic question is, as we look at these 11 items and we total them up, which I've been unable to do in the time that they're up, do I understand correctly that if we chose these 11, we could afford all 11 of those? And then my question is, if that's correct, then I would like to see 12 through 23 to be able to see what the comparable costs of some of those projects are, to then see whether there's something that we may want to shift out of scenario number 1. And following up on Supervisor Lepisto Kirtley's comments about the county office building McIntyre windows replacement, that's something that will need to be done. They're only going to get worse and the utility savings will only increase, but perhaps that we can push off if there's a project a little lower that, that really should be at a higher priority. So my first question is, am I correct that these 11 projects, we could afford all of them, or am I incorrect? In which case, where do we draw the line at the number of projects that we believe we can actually fund based on our current economic projections?
So this is Lori. I can answer this. These are projects included in the scenario, and yes, they're projects that the staff believes we can afford at this time. And this is a scenario we put forward for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lori. That's perfect.
Budget team that wants to add in, please.
Thank you, Lori. Well, I was trying to take myself off mute and add my video. Thank you for answering that. And the Supervisor Price had the question about the total amount of that. The items in fiscal year 21 the total amount recommended to be for the committee's consideration to be unpaused in fiscal year 21 would be $35.5 million. Of that 35.5, 8.1 is associated with shoring up maintenance and replacement. Then that remainder would be for these 8 projects listed in the column in fiscal year 21. So that would be approximately $27 million.
Right, you said 8 projects, but there are 11. Oh, I see. 3 of them are moved by 22. I got it. Okay, so could we look at the same financial information for items 12 through 23? In other words, is there a slide? Yeah. And so now what we can do then is look to see, are there things in 12 through 23, if I understand the process right, that we might consider to be more valuable, and we would move those up, maybe replace 1 or more in items 1 through 11, correct?
Yes. Yes, correct.
Then at this point, suggestions to make, because I'm only the second one to make comments. I would like to hear from the other 4 committee members as to what their thoughts are, both in terms of 1 through 11 and 12 through 23. And especially I want to hear from the school board members and then our other 2 members as well, because again, I clearly will put great weight to what the school board members say that their priority projects are. And thank you very much, Ms. Allshouse, Mr. Bowman, and all of the others who've participated at this point in the presentations.
Mr. Alcaro?
Okay, could we go back to the first screen, please? I'm actually pretty comfortable with what I'm seeing here. I'm very pleased to have the Crozet addition and improvements, be moving forward sooner as opposed to later. I understand that we only had the 2 projects in last year's plan, and that it was the Mountain View expansion. But I totally understand, and let me really say that I understand the situation we're in and how the changes had to be made and the delays had to be made. And so I'm not, being negative about that at all. I understand where Mountain View would probably have to go into next year, and I'm comfortable with that. A lot of these other items, I mean, the Western Albemarle High School one, it's an ADA issue, and I understand the importance of that. If something had to slip from our area to another page, that would be the one I'd be most comfortable with doing it. Just as a comment, and I'm not the pro from Dover on the county projects, but I think that anything we can be doing this year, especially as the pandemic is going to be coming to an end, knocking on wood, that anything that could be quality of life issues, and to me that gets into parks and trails and things along those lines. I'm all in favor of, but for the most part, I am very comfortable with what I'm seeing. Dr. Acuff?
Just a bit about the schools for Supervisor Price and everyone. The Crozet addition, add 16 classrooms and expand some of the specialty rooms, and it's very much needed. Right now, Brownsville is about 900 elementary students, which according to years ago, goal for elementary schools was no more than 600. So we are growing like crazy. And we have had to put trailers in at Brownsville. So I think that is really an essential project. The Mountain View expansion, likewise, we're over 700 students now, and we've had to move trailers in. So I think that's very important. With respect to the high school ADA improvements, this has come about. It's part ADA, but it's part gender equity, because there's bathrooms for the boys softball field, but not for the girls. So there are several issues there which potentially would expose the school division to a challenge. But so that's why it's there. Broadly, I know we developed this list a year ago, and I'm still generally supportive, but I think both the school division and the county have started looking at all of their policies and projects through an equity lens. And since I represent Jack Jewett, there's nothing on there that would directly benefit Jack Jewett, which all of you know is the most economically, has the most renters, has older housing stock, and the most low income people in the county. So that's just a comment about none of the projects, whether it's on page 1 or page 2, directly impact that community.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
I like what I see on this. And getting back to what Bea was saying originally, I think we need to look at what is being demanded of the county as a total right now. And I see that just from driving back and forth past the parks and so on, more people are using parks now than I've ever seen in the last 36 years. They're getting out and they're walking and so on and so forth. It's wonderful. And I'd like to see us continue with what we have on this list. That is not to say that we don't focus also on the school systems. And what we have listed here is pretty much what we had last year. And I remember 2 years ago entering my first meeting, and number 11 sprang up, and everyone was kind of trying to hide underneath the table, saying, "Oh my gosh, when are the lawyers going to be in here and instituting a lawsuit against gender discrimination, against this and against that, and so on and so forth, and it must be done." And lo and behold, it's still here. So I would like to focus on what we have up to this point. And I don't see anything on the next page that should supersede what is on the first page. I would love to see both pages be our primary focus, and we could do it all, but we can't. And staff has done a magnificent job of narrowing it down. So that's where I would like to be.
Thank you. Ms. Firehawk?
Thank you. You know, I'm certainly all for all of the school improvements that we need, and I would also second Cal's comments. Unfortunately, I have seen many. I want to talk about Biscuit Run for a second. I have seen multiple presentations on the plans for Biscuit Run. I don't have that budget in front of me, so I could not possibly comment on exactly what the 1.7 million is going to, whether it's, you know, everything that was desired or half of it. Maybe staff can comment to that. But one of the things that struck me was, you know, obviously that is a really big number, $1.7 million. And thinking about this, there are, you know, there's a project on the other page for Moores Creek, which would service a different part of our county that's coming in at 86,000. And so to make a sort of crude statement, to see if y'all are awake, I'm wondering if we could split the baby here. I'm wondering if there is a way to shave off some of that 1.7 million for Biscuit Run and to provide that $86,000 for the Moores Creek trail improvements, because we were just talking about the pandemic. One of the outcomes is people are desperately looking for ways that they can get outside and get fit. And I have hiked a number of the trails in the urban area. They're overcrowded, and to provide better infrastructure for being able to do that, I think is really important. The other part I want to make a point about is that in just in the past several months, Congress re-upped the Land and Water Conservation Fund, putting many millions of dollars into that fund, and that can be used for park improvements, park acquisitions, putting in playgrounds, putting in those kind of structures that I'm sure some of that 1.7 million for Biscuit Run covers. For Virginia, the allocation was $4,992,569. And so I'm just wondering if we might consider shaving some off Biscuit Run to allow the Moores Creek project to come forward, with the understanding that we would diligently try to apply for some of those land and water conservation funds for Biscuit Run. Now, maybe you've already made a serious application to use the Land and Water Conservation Fund for that. There are other funds besides that available from the state as well as the feds. So I'm just wondering, as Trevor says that he can answer that. So I would appreciate that very much. And I was not on the committee last year, so I'll just say that I don't have the deep background that some of you do for why these particular 11 projects are where they are and the other projects are on the sort of pause page. The last thing I want to say really quickly, and then I'll let Trevor respond to what I said, is that my ears did perk up when you talked about the convenience center. I live just about the farthest southernmost house in the county, really at the very tip of the county. And if you know the geography of the county, the tip of the county is not Scottsdale, it's actually Howardsville, Virginia. And it takes me a round trip of an hour and a half to drive to the convenience center the materials center. And there's a lot of dumping going on in Southern Albemarle because people do not have an hour and a half to take their trash somewhere, and there's very low service. So at some point, I would really like us to try to revisit that question. No, not this round, perhaps, but to have a convenience center in the southern part of the county where we have very little service. And there are a lot of citizens who continually lament the fact that everyone pays the same taxes, and yet they get very low level of service compared to other parts of the county. And, we could all say that, well, they should just all move to the urban ring, because we also know affordability is really difficult. And some of the only affordable housing, the vast majority tends to be way out in the rural area. So that was a mouthful. That was a lot, but I figure I'm not going to get a lot of chance to speak. And I'll yield to Trevor so he could say a little bit more about my question I raised about whether it's possible to shave off some of Biscuit Run to be able to do Morse Creek.
Yes, ma'am. Trevor Henry again, Assistant County Executive. Just really responding to the question on Biscuit Run from a scope perspective. The $1.7 million is will really get us into the 1,200 acres. The full master plan is on the order of $30 million plus. This 1.7 would get us an access point, an access way into the park, some parking, and basically some rudimentary, on-site services. But what it does get is access to the over 1,200 acres and already a significant existing trail system. The reason why this elevated to the top priority from a staff perspective, and one of the committee members mentioned this, was with the pandemic hitting us, and the way the county and other places had to shut down, we really were intentional, and we created an ambassador program to keep our green space, our trailways, our blueways open for the community, and we're seeing 300% plus use of those amenities than we have just a year earlier. So this really reflects that the prioritization around getting folks into ability to move and have free play, open play, exercise, those kinds of things. So could 1.7 be 1.6? Of course. Maybe we could look to try to do additive instead of subtractive on this. I know we are going to be applying for a VDOT grant, which will be additional funding that we believe is needed for the Biscuit Run Phase 1A, what we're talking about. But certainly we will aggressively pursue all available funding options for anything related to our park systems and our Greenway and Blueway program.
Thank you, that was very helpful. Can you respond to my question about whether you considered applying to the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
That I don't have the details on. I would defer. I believe there is a Parks and Recs rep on, maybe Bob or Amy, if they could answer that question. I'm sure that if there is an ability to draw down funding, we would be interested in pursuing it. I just I don't know the details of it. I apologize.
Thank you, everyone. This is Bob Krickenberger. Karen, to address your question, we are looking at all possible funding opportunities, but at the moment we have to land on an agreeable park entrance design with VDOT and look into our budget. And then once we have that finalized, then we will explore those opportunities.
Okay.
It wasn't a lot of detail, but there's just so many moving parts here before we can even actually, even submit an application. So that's our thoughts. Thank you.
All right, should we go around again for everyone to respond to what others have said?
Yes, please.
So am I up?
Yes.
Okay, if we can go back to the list, please. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to push again. And I am in favor of the Biscuit Run Park in light of what Mr. Krickenberger said. But dovetailing on what Ms. Firehawk said, I do think we can take maybe something from somewhere else. And I'm thinking, for example, the Cobb McIntyre windows replacement, maybe taking some of that, and this would be a staff question. How much or all the windows, I know we're gonna replace all of them, but do they all need to be replaced right now, or replacing the ones, maybe take half that amount, replace the ones that are in the worst shape, and then do the same thing next year and use that amount of money for maybe the Morris Creek or the, my favorite, a convenience center in Southern Albemarle. I'd like to know how much that would cost. My understanding is it wouldn't be that much. I do have a question regarding the Western Albemarle High School ADA improvements and softball field restroom. I realize if you build a permanent building, that's a lot of money. Have you all considered at the school level some of these trailers that a lot of them use at weddings, where they have, you know, that they're not that expensive, but yet you could use those. That would could also, since they're single, well, no, I guess some of them have multiple bathrooms on the inside, but if you get one that, I know for less than 30,000, you can get one both a male and female, or it could be gender neutral, something like that. Would that work in the meantime until we can build a permanent building? Would you be, is that something that's feasible? I'm just asking the question. That way you get something up right away so we don't get sued. And that might be helpful and save a little bit of money there. And like I said, the Morris Creek, which is important, but also the convenience center in Southern Albemarle. So notice a pattern here that I keep bringing up. Okay, thank you.
Maya, can you go ahead and get the questions answered that she brought up before we move along?
Sure,
Yes,
that
please.
makes perfect sense.
So on the question of windows, I think Lance is with us, or maybe someone can answer the windows question first.
I think.
Yeah, I'm actually going to defer to Blake Aplanel on this question. He's closer to this project than I am.
Blake Aplanel, Chief of Facilities Planning and Construction. What we have with the windows, it was a real good question. As far as the condition of the windows, we've done some preliminary work taking out windows at selected locations. We found that most of them and the conditions around them are in about the same condition. When they were installed, they were all installed at the same time. And our goal wasn't so much looking at the windows, but looking at what surrounds them,
Right,
to see whether or not moisture has gotten in. And so far at the locations that we didn't find much of that. So, you know, as far as identifying there's certain, you know, side of the building or something that might be better, we probably can't make that statement. But what we could do is do it in stages or phases. And, you know, the one, I guess, downside of that is, you know, if we were to do 50% of the windows, then certainly we would pay more for the materials themselves. And we would run the risk of later, you know, will there be price increases down the road later? But, you know, we have the ability to phase that if we felt like, you know, we wanted to do the front facing windows toward McIntyre first and then come back and do other windows in the future. So that certainly could be a possibility that could help us here to do part of the scope. there's another point with that too, in that we just got information back from our architect that if we do the job right now in a, partially occupied building, in fact, I think it's 20% occupied at the moment, we could see a savings anticipated to be about $50,000 if we were to go ahead and do that all right now with the building in the current occupancy level that it's in.
So a follow-up question, Blake, is that the 2 million, is that entirely for materials, or is that materials and labor?
This would be, all construction. We've already got design contract, and it's been 95% complete as far as design is concerned. So that would primarily be the construction.
Yeah, so, because what I'm thinking of is, can you buy all the materials, install it in phases, if it's materials and actual labor?
Providing we have storage. The one thing that makes windows a little more difficult is typically they're in pieces, and they go to the window installers, and then they, put them together sometimes at their shops and then bring them out, or sometimes they do it in the field. It just depends, on which way we go with that as far as the windows are concerned. But as long as we had the storage, to answer your specific question, yes, we could do that, but we would have to have a storage location for them.
Okay, and my other questions regarding use of trailers for the restrooms that would go to the Dr. Acuff and Mr. Alcarno.
That would be a possibility, and it could probably save a little money. The one thing that we've run into there, and in fact, it's quite questionable that the 529 that's listed there could do the project as it's currently scoped. That's a project that I would recommend that we go back and try to re-scope it, because we ran into a problem. It's not so much the facility down by the field, but getting services to it. The fire marshal is insisting that the sprinklers go there, and that requires a fire line that's really expensive. And then they're also asking for a new road or a fire road to be built to it as well. And that's what drove our cost up. We bid this once, and it came in significantly higher than the 529 that's listed there now. That was the original budget. And currently as it sits, we would need additional funding. That's why I would strongly recommend that we go back and try to re-scope this and revisit where we have everything, and can we avoid some of these significant additional costs that we hadn't anticipated originally.
Okay, and I'd want to hear from the school board members to see how they feel about that.
The way that the bathrooms, this is partly an equity issue, because there are restrooms for the boys facility, but there aren't for the girls. We've had a lot of complaints for it, and just in terms of pure equity, it's nice to have a bathroom if you're outside doing sports. But I do know that it also, even without the fire issues that Blake just met, the access issues, the ADA road improvements also to be ADA compliant. I don't know. I think I saw Rosalind Schmidt on this call, at least at one point. I don't know if we could put in some temporary facility, and maybe Blake, that as well, for the interim. But since the scope has changed, it makes some sense to me to go and rebid it or reconceptualize it.
When I say rescope, getting a bunch of, pretty experienced people together to try to figure, how can we do this within the budget? Could we move it to a location that maybe is up the hill, but still, available for use? So I don't want to get too much into the weeds.
Right.
I think we can take a good hard look at it and try to come up with a solution. At the parks, they do use the vault toilets. I know that's probably not something that anyone would want to do, but that could be a solution. It's not the best solution for a school property, but.
You said the what toilets?
At parks, you'll see vault toilets, which involves a tank in the ground, and they're not the greatest, you know, from a cleanliness standpoint. And that would be my last recommendation, really. But
what about the trailers? Use of the trailers.
the trailers still have the same
temporary
issue.
solution.
So if I could chime in, Rosalind Schmidt, I'm Chief Operating Officer with the school division. So the primary issue we're trying to solve here is as Dr. Acuff mentioned, it's a Title IX compliance issue.
Right.
So our temporary fix right now is porta potties. And so if you have a trailer, I would argue that's still a temporary fix and not bringing you in compliance. And so our recommendation would be do it right and do it long term as soon as you can. And so I would not personally invest in an additional temporary measure. As Blake mentioned, we have some opportunities to reduce that scope, moving it up the hill and other things like that. But
okay.
I guess for Rosalind or Blake, how long would it take to reconceptualize this or come up with additional cost numbers? Or
well, we could get to work on that immediately, and you know, a couple months. Probably looking at, you know, by the end of January, we could have come up with what I think would be a reasonable couple options. Yeah, because we've already bid this once. Everyone's very familiar with the project. We've got a team that has looked at this from a number of, you know, perspectives, I guess. And I don't think it will take a real long time for us to develop a scope that, you know, where we could go ahead and, you know, estimate it. So I'm thinking a couple months toward the end of January at the latest.
But that's beyond our decision making with this, unless we put a placeholder.
And if you get that information in a couple of months, would this be something that could be completed in fiscal year 21, or would it slide into 22?
Would probably slide into the summer as far as completing the project, the construction. If we were to come up with a viable solution and went out to bid, you know, you go out to bid in March, April. There's also, you know, depending on the extent of the work, there's, you know, potential site plan review and things like that. So this job would definitely end in FY22. Yeah.
Okay, so from a budgeting point of view, that could kind of go either way then. But to move forward with it, I agree, is important to get it done.
All right, are we okay to move on? Ms. Price?
Thank you. As far as number 11, it's a Title IX, it's equity, it's ADA. I don't have any issues with it. I agree with Ms. Schmidt. If you're going to do it, which we need to do, let's do it right. Let's do it the first time. Additional temporary solutions, I'm just not in favor of. I did look at it from this perspective, the whole thing from this perspective. We've got 11 items issued, 8 for FY21. If I did my math right, which I'm not necessarily vouching for as I'm trying to do this quickly, we've got $27,329,000 worth of projects, $21,400,000 of which is for the Crozet addition and improvements. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just simply stating as I calculated. That leaves $5,929,000 for 7 projects, $2 million of which would be for the COB McIntyre Windows replacement. So it leaves $3,929,000 for 6 other projects. When I look at it that way, it really is not a lot we're getting done through the capital improvement program. I appreciate Mr. Albemarle's explanation on the window situation. I'm replacing some windows myself at my house, and I know when you're buying windows, you have to have extremely safe storage if they're not going to be installed, or you're going to end up having breakage, and then you're going to just have to replace it. If it's possible to spread that out over more than one fiscal year, that might be good, but I have to defer to facilities and environmental services to let us know whether that's something we really need to do. I understand that the damage, so to speak, may not be as extensive as it might otherwise be. I would like to look at items 12 through 23 again. And I also want to express my appreciation to Ms. Firehawk for talking about a convenience center in the southern part of the county. It was something I planned on bringing up sort of in my closing remarks, because right now we're focused on these projects. So again, we only have $5,929,000 to play with if you take out the Crozet Day School. And I'm going to defer principally to the school board members to let us know whether that is the actual figure that they need. I'm not questioning it. Please understand, I'm not questioning it. I'm very pleased that right now we've got Scottsdale Elementary's $12 million program, improvements that are going in. And I definitely think when we look at the schools, elementary and middle schools need to have facilities to a greater extent than the high schools. I understand a lot of the high school students are pretty pleased with the virtual learning. So maybe we'll be completely looking at that higher levels of public school education a little differently in facilities. So as I look here at 12 through 23, my question is, are there any things that we could pull from here to substitute part of what we might be able to save if we were able to defer, for example, the part of the $2 million from COB McIntyre? And candidly, back to item number 1, the Biscuit Run, I believe that 1.7 probably needs to stay there. But $86,000 for Moores Creek Trail and Trailhead number 16, that is an extremely small amount. $53,000 for the pilot fundraising parks project. That may be something, I don't know if this is like a GoFundMe process where we're trying to find ways other than tax revenues towards our parks and recreation. But basically, as I look at it, focusing on these 23 projects, there's not a lot of flexibility that we've got. If there was a way to find a few thousand here and there, then I would like to see number 16, number 19, possibly move up a little higher. And with that, I will sort of leave my discussion for right now, but Ms. Oshouse, when we do get to the conclusion, I would like to be able to address some comments about what I would like to see county staff work on as we go forward to future years CIP funding. Thank you.
Mr. Arcaro?
I would first like to say that as regards number 6, I beg pardon, we'll just say the Crozet edition, that Supervisor Price is of great importance, and it's a value, and it's a little bit overdue given how the schools have been bulging out in this area. So respectfully, I do feel very strongly about that. I'm fine with pushing out Mountain View to next year, and I think that would make some sense. One thing that I would like to just mention, and not in terms of moving it up in priority, but just making sure that we stay aware of the high school capacity improvement for Center 2. And because this goes back to a project that we had approved in December of 2017. And we were facing the situation then of spending or recommending for spending of $120 to $140 million for a new high school up north. And there are many, many different aspects of that, money being one of them, where that was not, in my opinion, a good idea or the right thing to be doing. And so that's where the center project came in, and which would include at that point 2 different centers, one at 600 and one at 200. This current one is intended to seat 400 students, but in a way to avoid having to build larger structures a la a new 1,200 student high school, so that the cost to spend $27 million or $30 million for 400 seats compared to, you know, the higher cost. That, you know, the dollars are definitely there. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that, because the original project for that was projected to open in 2021. And now we're projected to open in 2023. And again, I totally understand why we're having to push things back. So I'm not fussing about that. But I'd hate to see this continue to go out into 2025, because in 2024, we're projecting that there would be 14, or the original projections were there would be 1,400 students at Western and something like 2,200 students at Albemarle High School. And neither one of those facilities is in a position to, you know, to handle that. And I'm just to wrap up, Supervisor Price, with what you said about news, and one of my school board members has been texting me online with the same comment, that, you know, this is a whole new world we're going into, and online is actually working better in the high schools than in the lower schools. And so there may not be as much of a need for capacity. I don't believe that's going to be the case, but I think there will be more and more online, you know, capabilities and needs in high schools. And I think this is a subject that we really need to be talking about in the early part of this coming year in the school board sessions, because capacity, I think, is always going to be an issue, especially in the lower grades. But we still need to keep this center option open, and I would just want to bring this up so that we can be talking about it in fiscal years to come, but not too far down the pipe.
Good point.
Dr. Acuff?
It's always somewhat uncomfortable being on this advisory committee, because it is the schools that soak up a lot of the expenditures for capital improvements. The challenging facts, however, are that we continue to grow. Whatever the economy looks like, we continue to grow. And although we had whittled down the use of trailers to maybe about 30 4 or 5 years ago, we're on a great big upward trend. We have what we thought was going to be 5 years worth of, you know, 9 trailer, 8 classroom complex behind Albemarle High School. It's already been 4 years, and there's no end in sight in terms of dealing with that capacity. And as Jono said, we continue. It may well be that we can and will offer some more sophisticated online educational opportunities for upper level high school kids, but we don't know what that's going to look like. And in the meantime, we're continuing to grow. I mean, we've got 200 too many students at, you know, Albemarle High School. Our consultants tell us we will be overcrowded at Western within a couple of years, and we really do need to make some decisions on that. With respect to the rest, I mean, in addition to being a school board member, I'm also a member of the community. So I actually like parks and all of these additions. So if there's a way we can put even a few more low-cost projects in this list, I would welcome them. I know Maya said at the beginning that there would be some different kind of revenue numbers in January after we make these decisions. I don't know how that might impact how much money would be available. I don't know. But I think we can delay a little bit the high school center. And I know that we are going to revisit it as a school board and division, but I don't think it's yes or no. I think what is it going to look like?
Thank you. Mr. Morris, do you have anything to add?
No, I do not, other than I would like to really push for the going ahead and funding the entire amount for the Biscuit Run Park, because if we do not have that entrance, we could just run out of gas on that. And I love the Moores Creek thing, but that's a selfish thing. But that needs to be put on the burner for the next year or two. But thank you so much for all you've done.
And Ms. Firehawk.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to unmute myself. I said I tried to shake my head. I didn't have anything I needed to add at that time.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left, and I think it's necessary to come to an agreement on what adjustments we would like to see. I have heard some repeated suggestions, so I will attempt to summarize them, and you all can let me know. I'm hearing that I've heard from more than one member that you would like to see the Moores Creek project added into the into scenario number 1. I think that as a first step, we can see how it could fit. It is a small dollar amount. We might not necessarily have to take off from other projects. If we do, though, I did hear a lot about the windows replacement project. Is there agreement that if something needs to be reduced, that would be the area to reduce were we to add Moores Creek? Do we have 2 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up? Okay. Does that work for the budget team in General Gov as a adjustment to scenario number 1?
It does, Maya. Thank you.
Is there anything, another adjustment that I might have missed that more than one board member mentioned?
I think so.
Yes. I'm going to once again bring up the convenience center. I did ask Lori, and I got a thumbs up from Karen. Thank you. I did ask Lori, and she did say that we've been asked to focus on these 23 items, and I understand that. However, there may be some adjustment, and I wanted to make it clear to the others who are also interested in this besides Karen and I, that Lori said that maybe under another budget scenario, maybe not this group, but Lori, would you explain that? How there is a possibility to perhaps have a convenience center, and if there are any savings off of what we decide today, any shaving of anything or any savings that we can put it toward a convenience center. Lori, could you address that, please?
Sure. Yes, we had a little a moment in the chat to talk back and forth briefly on it. My suggestion, and as you know, Supervisor Lepisto currently wasn't there at the very beginning when we talked about the charge of the committee this year being a little special because we're on such a short timeline, and our focus were on these 23 projects, as the role of the committee was to look at these 23 projects and to provide your thoughts on them. And we definitely have been hearing about the convenience center. And my suggestion would be for this committee can also go make a comment, right? So you could say, here's the scenario the committee recommends for our charge, look at these 23 projects. But in your letter and in your memo to the rest of the process, you can make a statement about something. So my suggestion would be to consider making if you have a strong statement to make to inform the rest of the development process. As you know, you're one piece on that timeline, that this could be something the committee could do in your recommendation letter.
Good idea.
Okay, thank you. And I did want to note that I'm trying to carry the burden for Supervisor Price, because I know that this is something near and dear to her heart, and she deserves this.
Thanks, V.
You're welcome.
Lori, I would like to make concluding remarks. I don't know if other people do as well, so I will wait my turn.
Lori, do you mind if I interject for just a moment? I want the committee to know something that the county executive's office and myself have talked about is based on conversation that we had last week related to broadband, and knowing that the board's strategic initiatives reserve, that 3.6 million, that there are a few projects that you all wanted to and did discuss last week that we are planning to bring back together. And so that would include the convenience center, that would include broadband, and that would also include the roundabout in Earlysville and Fry's Mill. I'm going off at Fry's Mill Road. I'm so sorry. I'm going off of memory.
Fry's Ford.
Thank you. Not Fry's Mill. There's got to be a Fry's Mill somewhere in this county. So we're planning to bring those back at the same time so that you all can have that conversation about these priorities that were brought up last week. I just wanted to clarify that. But it doesn't distract or detract from what Lori just mentioned. I think that's a great idea for this committee as well.
Ms. Firehawk?
Yes, I know that for several of these budgets, I have a hard time evaluating them because, as I said, I'm new to the CIP. I'm not new to budgeting, but I don't know the details, so it's hard for me to make determinations. In my day job, I do a lot of fundraising. I run a nonprofit, and so I'm very familiar with grants. And so I just would like it for some of these. I like them to be posted somewhere so we could actually look at the details. I understood the conversation about the windows and the economies of scale and getting it all done at once, but there are other things that, again, might be able to be parsed a little bit. And I cannot give an intelligent recommendation simply off these great big figures. And so I don't know if you want me to offline send you a list of the ones I'd like to see the detailed budgets for. I'm happy to do that, but I'm just going to reflect that that is a difficulty as a committee member at this time.
Yes, we can provide those. Either for the ones that specific ones that you want to look at, would probably be the best thing that we could do for you, or any other way. We can.
Okay, yeah.
Something.
I mean, I've also put windows and done restorations of old buildings with windows. I don't need to look at that one, for example. So yeah, I'll put together a list. Thank you.
And we'll share it with the whole committee.
Good.
Lori, I'd just like to make a couple of comments real quick. First off, I want to thank everyone for the way in which this work has been done. I want to thank county staff for the work you've done. And we've looked at these 23 projects, and with which pretty much large consensus, we've come to agreement with what staff has recommended and a few little tweaks we would like to have here and there. I sent it earlier today to some county staff. I want to share a little bit of the theme of that with everyone who's participating here today. And that is, when we look at projects through the equity lens, are we looking prospectively or are we looking retrospectively? And by that I mean, are we identifying what the needs are through the equity lens and then selecting the projects, or that's prospectively, or are we selecting projects and then looking backwards and seeing how we can then apply an equity aspect to the implementation of those projects? And I think the former is the way we want to go, not the latter. I want to share two experiences from when I lived in Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, and say, first off, I do not believe that those exist here in Albemarle County, but it drives home part of the point that I'm trying to make. I used to live in Virginia Beach. I'd ride my bike 20 miles to work at the Naval Station in Norfolk. I would ride through a predominantly Black neighborhood, come up the hill, and there would be a guardrail perpendicular across the road separating the Black neighborhood from the adjacent white neighborhood. I would ride down the hill into the white neighborhood, and a little while later, I'd come upon a stretch of unpaved road of about 200 yards through another small pocket. And then when I passed through that Black neighborhood back to a white neighborhood, the road was paved again. Now, we don't pave roads here in the county. That's a VDOT issue. But every single day I rode my bike, I was reminded of the equity issue of those two situations. Norfolk has light rail. They have a 7-mile track. It stops at the boundary of Virginia Beach because the residents of Virginia Beach didn't want those people riding to the beach from Norfolk. That's an equity issue. So what I would ask is that as we move forward trying to identify additional projects for our CIP, that we take that equity lens and we look for those who are the most disadvantaged. And I really appreciate several other people today mentioning the convenience center. Supervisor Liz Palmer and I have been working trying to get the county to locate a convenience center in the southern part of the county, because much like Ms. Firehawk, I have an hour-and-a-half round trip to Ivy. I try to consolidate as much as I can, but that's a long way to go, and that's one of the reasons we have so much garbage down here. But it's not just the rural area. As other people mentioned, we also have the broadband issue, not only in the rural areas, but in some of our development areas. And we have areas in the Jack Jewett district that need sidewalks. There's a particular place that has been brought up a couple of times where there's large traffic coming off of Georgetown Road, Solomon and Ingleside, I think, maybe the two roads, where the residents cannot safely navigate their way by foot or by bicycle because we don't have sidewalks there. So, we need to make sure that we take care not only of those who are in our new developments, but also we take care of our residents who are in our older development areas. And another example I used this morning is it's like you've been a customer of a company for years and you see they have this great new deal for new customers, but they've got nothing for their customers who've been with them for years. And that's what I want to make sure we don't do, is that we don't ignore the people who have been residents of our county who need infrastructure improvements and support as we focus principally on development. And I'm really pleased that that is not the impression. I mean, the impression I have is that in Albemarle County, we do pay attention to all of our residents. And what we see is that in every area, rural as well as development, we have equity issues. And so I would simply ask county staff to use equity to identify projects, not just to identify projects and then see how we can make them more equitable. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to provide a closing comment?
I very much like your comment, Supervisor Price. And I think the way I understand after these several years on the committee, various entities within county government submit their projects and then they're ranked. So if we're really going prospectively to look at projects, we need to push it all the way back into the development of the project ideas before we get there. But I also wonder, and I represent Jack Jewett, that's not a surprise to anyone, but what do we even mean by equity? I mean, is it, for example, the sidewalk project that Supervisor Price mentioned, I would suspect in my neighborhood, and I live in Jack Jewett, people are also using the sidewalks a lot more. I mean, they're using the parks more, but they're also in our neighborhood, we don't have access to that many parks. And a lot of our lower income residents are needing to use the sidewalks to even, get around their neighborhoods. So is it how much human benefit there is? I mean, what's the traffic levels? I don't know, but I think we need to think carefully about how we even solicit the projects before we then evaluate them.
Good point, Lou.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for all the work that's come in from the county side, from the school side, and for putting this meeting together. I welcome the new members to the committee and look forward to working with you on this year and next year. And that's about what I've got. But I learned a lot, and I always look forward to doing that at every one of these meetings. Thank you.
I would just like to echo Jono's comments. They're great. I agree.
Right. Is there anything from the staff side that needs to be addressed, or is staff set?
Maya, this is Lori speaking. Do you want to talk with them about the next steps? Didn't we have a slide at the end on next steps?
We sure did. So we will come back again on December 3rd, and we will provide the alternate scenario that we discussed. We'd like to, because of the short turnaround time, we'll come up with a draft recommendation letter to go in front of both boards so that any mid-year adjustments can be made in time to carry these projects out this fiscal year. And I imagine we'll also have some time to reflect and debrief on this revised process for this year and make some preliminary plans for how our longer term 5-year CIP planning will go in the future.
Thanks, Maya. You hit it so well. For example, these comments that you've had as you closed out will be great information to add into the letter to start informing the future, as well as a debriefing on the past. So the letter can serve as that vehicle as well.
Yeah. Lori, just one last question. Will we be on Zoom or Team next in December?
Zoom? Is that going to work for you?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Is there any other comments from any other staff members that are here today? I think hearing none, I think we can wrap it up. We're right on time. It's so great. Thank you all so very much. It was really a pleasure, even in the virtual world.
Happy Thanksgiving,
everybody.
Yes.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everybody.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.